Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here. Breaking news, we now can confirm that over 5 million dirty names have been removed from the voter rolls across the country in several states as a result of Judicial Watch's litigation, our lawsuits, and our legal action. The new numbers are an uptick, a significant uptick from the prior number of 4. We have reports in from Kentucky. New York City is now removed up to 1 million names from the rolls, thanks to your Judicial Watch heavy lifting in court, specifically a settlement of a federal lawsuit we filed. We issued this news this week because we received 2 new reports from Kentucky and New York City, places we had sued. In Kentucky, we had a consent decree that required them to clean up the rolls because they weren't cleaning up the rolls as federal law requires. New York City, I don't think they had cleaned up the rolls at all for a period of time until we sued, and they came back and said, we're going to clean them up. And over the course of the last few years or so, and most recently, they added another 500,000 names to the mix, bringing the total to well over 1 million, practically speaking. The new numbers come in as a result of Judicial Watch's litigation under a law called the National Voter Registration Act, and that law is typically been known as the Motor Voter Bill, but it also which requires states to make registration available to people at places where public benefits are given, generally speaking. And Republicans didn't like the idea of that, and many conservatives, because what would happen is that it would lead potentially to multiple registrations for an individual and double registrations all across the land. And one of the provisions of the law was, as a result, supposedly to take care of that issue, was to require the states to take reasonable steps to clean up the rolls. Well, you can guess how that worked out. The left came in and just wanted to register everybody and their mother and sued everyone to make sure that was happening. Zero interest, practically speaking, in making sure the states were cleaning up the rolls until Judicial Watch came to town, and started enforcing it through federal lawsuits representing ourselves and others. We had litigation in Ohio and Indiana to begin back in, it's now at least 13, 14 years ago. And it's been litigation, lawsuit after lawsuit across the country to clean up the rolls. And it's been successful. Sometimes even sending a warning letter is enough to get a jurisdiction or a state to clean up the rolls. For instance, in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, we have been investigating Pennsylvania for some time and have had success in cleaning the rolls up there. Allegheny came back to us and said, oh, well, thanks for your letter. We removed 69,000 names from the rolls. So all of those numbers totaled 4 million or so as of essentially just a few months ago, and included 1.2 million names being removed from the rolls in LA County after we sued and settled out there. We subsequently had to file another lawsuit, which is ongoing because of the rest of the state. It continues to be a mess. So there are millions of names that still need to be removed. But it's a remarkable achievement for Judicial Watch and for you, dear voter and dear citizen, because having more accurate lists means that you have less opportunities for voter fraud. Cleaner elections will result from having cleaner voting rolls. Dirty voting rolls make it more likely that the elections will be dirtier, because it's just necessarily allows, again, gives you more opportunities for voter fraud, because you have names on the list who aren't supposed to be there, and obviously that's a temptation for someone to vote in their place. I mean, that's why the law is in place. Otherwise, why have voter roll cleanups at all if it was just a maintenance issue? It's a voter fraud issue. It's a reassurance for the American people that the rolls are clean and you don't have ghost names on the rolls or zombie names on the rolls of people who died or moved away or otherwise become ineligible. So in the latest group of numbers, we got reports that In some, Kentucky, under this consent decree, has reported that they've removed 735,000 ineligible voter registrations since 2019 as part of this consent decree they entered into with Judicial Watch. And as part of a 2022 settlement with Judicial Watch, New York City alone has removed 918,139, basically a million, because it's got to be a million for a variety of reasons, but the actual number that I'll go with for the purposes of the release is 918,000. So they removed 918,000 ineligible names from its rolls. They had removed just in between March 2023 and 2025, 477,000, and that's in addition to, prior to that, because of the initial settlement, 441,000 names. So the total is well over 900,000, so 1 million names practically speaking. And so we're well north of 5 million names when you add up all the states that we've sued and settled with, or states that we've warned and they've gone and done voter roll cleanups as a result. It's really tremendous. And this comes on top of Judicial Watch's, it's not like we're giving up. So we've got ongoing litigation to clean up the rolls in Illinois, which are a mess, Oregon, which I think are some of the worst voting rolls in the country, as best I recall, and in California. And then there's going to be a new raft of numbers that come out later this year, and so we'll be looking at those very carefully to see if there are other opportunities or other needs to clean up the rolls in other states. The last big study as it relates to voter rolls, and it goes back several years, so the numbers may be outdated, but it was well over 20 million plus extra names on the rolls that shouldn't be there. So there's a lot more work to be done. And thankfully, the Trump administration has expressed interest through the president's executive order to clean up the rolls and take steps to clean up the rolls. As I said, it's been Judicial Watch who's been in court suing at the federal level. There have been some other groups, and I think the RNC filed a few lawsuits following Judicial Watch's lead recently. But what a remarkable number! Just 5 million names, and isn't it outrageous? Isn't it outrageous those names would still be there but for Judicial Watch? Where's the government? Where are the state election officials? That the only way these names get cleaned up when we literally go to federal court or do our own independent analysis, and it's not like we're making up numbers, we're relying on their data to say, hey, you're not cleaning up the rolls. All they have to do? This is all they have to do under the current application of the law as interpreted and applied by the courts and specifically the Supreme Court. So if you don't show up, let's say you didn't vote in 2024, the state or the locality is supposed to send you a postcard. Hey, you didn't vote. Are you still there? Are you still at this address? Are you still eligible? And if you don't respond to that postcard or otherwise vote in the next two general elections at the federal level, so let's say it's 2024, and if you don't vote in 2024, you get the postcard, you ignore the postcard, and then you don't vote in 2026 at the congressional level, the congressional elections, and then you don't vote in 2028 again at the next presidential congressional election federal cycle, they're supposed to remove your names from the rolls. And the fact they're not doing that, so it's like 5 years plus, practically speaking, sometimes, before your names get removed. And they don't even want to do that basic work. And the fact that we have to go to court to get it done is just another indication of, frankly, the importance of Judicial Watch. Because if we didn't do it, it'd be a mess. And I'm convinced that the millions of names that have been removed and our efforts to kind of police the issue, not only on this but other issues related to election integrity, helped stop the steal in 2024. And it's going to help stop potential steals in the future. And it's because we're not sitting on our laurels. We continue to do the heavy lifting in court, as I said, with new lawsuits new investigations, and of course we're monitoring what the states are doing in places where we've already been, like in Colorado, North Carolina, as I said, Pennsylvania, etc. And of course, you as a citizen can ask questions about what your local election and state election officials are doing to clean up the rolls. You literally can ask the questions under federal law, Section 8I. You can go look it up. And this is on top of Judicial Watch's other work in support of voter ID, in support of ensuring that the federal requirement that there's an election day be upheld. As I said before, we have an election day, not an election week, and we obtained a massive series of rulings in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals affirming that. Counting ballots that arrive after election day is unlawful. That's what the circuit court ruled. We've got lawsuits on Illinois where they count ballots for up to 14 days after Election Day. And we got lawsuits in California, or a lawsuit in California, where they count ballots for up to 7 days after Election Day. And that post-Election Day counting of illicit ballots, in my view, or as we allege, resulted in Republicans losing 2 seats in the Congress. They were winning on Election Day, and those seats were lost to Democrats as a result of post-Election Day counting of ballots that arrived after Election Day. I mean, it's not like the ballots were sitting in the corner and they missed them and they got in there by election. No. That'd be suspicious, but that wasn't happening. These are ballots that are arriving after Election Day. And President Trump issued this executive order last week, as I highlighted for you in last week's update, where he affirmed that the Justice Department is going to enforce this law because you have 18, 19 states that count ballots that arrive after Election Day. And what has happened since then, because he had not only in that executive order an affirmation of that, an effort to help clean up the rolls and an affirmation of that law, but also taking key steps to ensure that non-citizens aren't registering to vote and voting. And what did the left do? The Democratic Party and their fronts sued to stop Trump from trying to secure our elections from non-citizen voting, because right now there's no enforcement mechanism, no check on someone who says they're a citizen when they register to vote. Certainly at the federal level, there's no check in place. All you have to do is attest that you're a citizen and are eligible, and there's no check on that. And Americans want that check in place. They support voter ID. Well north of 80% of Americans support voter ID. Well north of 80% of Americans support ensuring and taking steps that citizens or non-citizens or voters have to prove their citizenship or show evidence of citizenship in order to register to vote and vote. In my view, any opposition to voter ID, any opposition to cleaning up the rolls, any opposition to the absurdity of counting ballots that show up after Election Day, I mean, that's people who support that, generally speaking, for a political purpose, they want to be able to steal elections when necessary, and those techniques make it easier to steal elections. Heck, in these cases where I'm talking about, where we're suing in Mississippi, the Fifth Circuit, and Illinois on cleaning up or stopping the counting of ballots that arrive after Election Day, the Biden administration filed statements to the court saying Judicial Watch should lose, that anyone should be able to count ballots seemingly forever after Election Day, as long as they get there. Under the logic, what would be the deadline other than Election Day? So these fights are ongoing, and and this issue of non-citizen voting is a big deal, and the left wants you to believe it's not an issue. And of course they say, well, it's not a big issue, which is different than saying it's not an issue at all. And if people think that non-citizens are voting, they think the elections are being compromised. And we have a right to ensure that our elections are not compromised. And Elon Musk had a big event before these Wisconsin Supreme Court state elections, in the state Supreme Court election in Wisconsin this week. And he had one of his colleagues from Doge come on and shared some astonishing data not only as it relates to the Biden illegal alien invasion, but the possibility that non-citizens are also, as a result, voting in our elections. Let's go to that.
Is what jumped out at us. When we saw these numbers, we were like, what is this? In 21, you see 270,000 people, goes all the way to 2.1 million in 24. These are non-citizens that are getting Social Security numbers.
Yeah, this is a mind-blowing chart.
Yeah, just this literally blew us away. Like, we went there to find fraud, and we found this by accident. And this isn't political, by the way. My parents are immigrants. Yeah, this country's been great to us. My brother and sister all born in Spain. I'm pro-legal immigration. This is not political. This is not political. This is about America and the future of America.
And it's the numbers, just as he says later in the video, I think, they tracked down some of the non-citizen Social Security numbers and found that they were voting by the thousands, at least in one state, as I recall the statement was. So look, we have tens of millions of non-citizens in the United States. A certain number of them are going to register to vote contrary to law. Some will do it mistakenly. Most won't. They think they can get away with it. That's my suspicion. But either way, a certain number is going to register to vote. And of those, a certain number is going to vote. Once you're registered to vote, voter ID ain't going to stop you, because many non-citizens have the ID sufficient in order to vote. And that's why Trump's reform to better ensure that proof of citizenship is required before you register to vote is so important. And as I said, the left opposes all of that. And there have been studies. There was a significant study from several years ago, and they looked at data from one of the Obama year elections. It was either 2008 or 2010. And they found that non-citizen voting in this study, as quoted in the Washington Post, was sufficient to sway the election in favor of some key Democrat senators who were the key votes in getting Obamacare passed. I mean, so those are the consequences down the road of non-citizens being able to vote. You don't need a large number in order to sway elections. And of course, any one person voting illegally cancels the legal vote of a citizen out. So frankly, one's too many as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure you agree with me on that. And then there's the other issue of getting or mass deporting non-citizens from the United States, because the other way in which the presence of non-citizens can impact elections is by counting them for purposes of apportionment under the census. So if non-citizens are, let's say, residing in New York, they get counted. And when they figure out how many people live in New York and how many seats for Congress or how many seats for the Electoral College New York should get, those non-citizens get counted in favor of New York. And when you've got tens of millions of non-citizens here in the United States, you're talking about real numbers. And they tend to be in states that benefit in terms of being blue. Democrat states tend to benefit, studies have shown, and are likely to benefit again, with the added power, either maintained or expanded, in terms of congressional representation and electoral college representation, as a result of the presence of non-citizens being counted for purposes of apportionment. And it's really a simple issue. And I want to go back to the beginning. One way to kind of cut through all of this is to make sure the voting rolls are clean. Not only of people who have voted or who are moved away or died, but non-citizens. And I talked about this issue generally in CPAC, and it was a good little summary. Let's run that. And of course, we have to ensure voting rolls are clean, because dirty voting rolls can mean dirty elections.
The rolls are a mess, but Judicial Watch's heavy lifting is getting results. Our historic election lawsuits and pressure have led to 4 million dirty names being removed from the voting rolls in the last year or so.
So the issue of the dirty voting rolls is a significant one. It remains one. And there are millions more that need to be cleaned up, and that's why we're in federal court now. And on top of that, we've had elections in Wisconsin. It was very curious because I talked about the popular vote for Wisconsin. I want to show a tweet I posted because you had a very far left member of a far left judge win and get an election to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, basically maintaining the left-wing majority there. Come back to me on this. Let's hold off on this tweet. And also on the ballot was a constitutional amendment, a strong one for voter ID. Wisconsin already has voter ID. And the concern was that the liberal Supreme Court, which would be further solidified by this judge, would overturn it. And that's why they inserted it into the Constitution through the amendment, through this voting process here. And the numbers for the voter ID were much more than the number for the left-wing judge who was running. Let's go to the tweet now. And this is what I posted. Strong voter ID constitutional amendment received about 145,000 more votes than the winning leftist Supreme Court candidate. And then I posted shortly thereafter, and you can see it got a lot of attention, 1.3 million, so it did go viral. The difference has narrowed a bit to around 132,000 votes. And since then, what is it, 135,000 votes? So I think that's probably going to be close to the final number, 135,000 votes. Now, I posted the tweet thinking, well, isn't this interesting? Voter ID has more support than the left-wing judge who is now going to be a member of the Supreme Court. Others looked at those numbers and said, well, that's an indication of fraud. They are suspicious of it. And it's like, well, you know, that's one conclusion one can draw. I mean, there are a variety of reasons potentially that are reasonable to explain the difference in voter ID getting so many more voters. And the most readily available reason is that Democrats support voter ID too. So the fact that a bunch of Democrats came out didn't mean they wouldn't vote against voter ID because they support it. It's the Democratic Party leadership and extremists in the party that oppose voter ID. But I don't know what the full answer is because it does raise questions. But I did raise it initially to highlight the strong support for voter ID in an election where it was a nationalized election, right? You had Elon Musk spending a bunch of money, President Trump getting involved. Obviously, the Democrats spent a bunch of money to try to get that judge in place. And so all this focus on the election, and out of it comes overwhelming public support for one of the strongest voter ID laws in the country, which is now Wisconsin. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So I was on C-SPAN earlier this week, and I was talking about judges, among other things. And President Trump was criticized by Chief Justice Roberts for talking about impeaching judges. And Chief Justice Roberts said, well, that's not appropriate because, you know, you have the appellate review. You shouldn't really be talking about impeaching judges. That isn't exactly what he said, but that was more or less what he said. And of course, since then, you've had judge after judge, as I say, engage in judicial coups against the presidency, taking powers away from the president to control foreign policy, protect our country, protect our sovereignty, protect the public safety. We don't elect judges to do that. But we just had a ruling come down today by an Obama appointee in Maryland telling President Trump he essentially had to negotiate with El Salvador to get a foreign national who's an MS-13.
Have Trump administration officials been too quick to call for the impeachment of federal judges? We both know that it was Supreme Court Justice John Roberts who put out that statement. Here's the word.
So the concern is that that the judges are out of control, rogue at the district court level, and the appellate process isn't working quickly enough in order to protect the public interest. Now, I can complain about it, but the appellate court's going to only move, and the Supreme Court's only going to move as fast as they want in the end. But let's not pretend it's not a crisis for the country as a result of this judicial overreach. And I complained about Chief Justice Roberts' complaint on C-SPAN because I think his concerns were misplaced.
Have Trump administration officials been too quick to call for the impeachment of federal judges? We both know that it was Supreme Court Justice John Roberts who put out that statement. Here's the wording of it. For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose. An unusual statement out of the Supreme Court Chief Justice.
It was unusual. I think it was unfortunate, and I think it was political. And to the degree it can be read...
The Chief Justice was being political?
Yeah. To the degree it can be read to suggest that impeachment's not constitutional, which I think it's fairly implied there, it's wrong. Simply wrong. And the unprecedented interference with the president's powers under the executive branch, that should be troubling to the chief. He's responsible for the judiciary. Imagine if he said a statement, said, we've got an unprecedented move by the president to assert his authorities. And we have to be careful just because he's doing things we're not used to give him the deference under the Constitution. Why didn't he say that?
Do you think Chief Justice John Roberts, did he put out statements like this, and the courts better than I do, during the Biden administration when they had disagreements with the courts?
No. I don't think when the left was calling for the impeachment of his colleagues, he even put out a statement like that. Yeah. And I kind of talk about the issue of judges a little bit more and the constitutional basis and the concerns the framers had about the judiciary and how they thought impeachment was one of the ways to control an out-of-control judiciary when necessary.
What's your opinion of federal judges?
My opinion of federal judges, the judiciary is a branch of the federal government established by our Constitution. It's a separate but equal branch, and it's incumbent, in my view, kind of to get to the point, I think, of the topic here today, potentially, for judges to apply the law fairly and neutrally without letting their political animus get in the way of it.
What is judicial activism?
Judicial activism is substituting your own personal views for the fair and neutral application of the law. And it's a temptation for judges of both the left and the right. It's like, oh, well, I know what the outcome of this particular case should be, and I'm going to figure out a way how to get there, using the judicial process. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. You can have a philosophy as you approach issues, but you're really supposed to fairly apply the law without regard to party or partisanship.
The Washington Post has a story about cases pending in federal courts having to do with Trump executive orders. This is the lead graph. Unions, civil rights groups, and others are squaring off in court with the Trump administration, filing roughly 140 lawsuits over the dismantling of cuts in agencies by DOJ, the firings of federal employees, immigration restrictions. The challenges have blocked many of President Trump's initiatives for now, while the administration has won a few significant early victories. Does that concern you, the number of lawsuits and the number of executive actions that have been blocked via federal courts?
The number of lawsuits doesn't concern me because I recognize President Trump is engaged in an unprecedented strategy of reform that's really broad and hard to keep up with. So it's no surprise that his political opponents, or people who think they're being harmed, are suing. What's concerning is how many judges are kind of I'm not a lawyer, but I've enough unfortunate experience in litigation with the government, is how quickly these courts are interfering with the presidential powers, duties, and responsibilities and granting emergency relief to these individuals in ways I don't think the law allows for. So there's this almost panicked judicial decision making that's more political than constitutional, in my view, and that's what's concerning. It's everyone has a right to sue, within the law, but courts are supposed to police requests for relief that aren't really appropriate under the law. I want to sue on all sorts of things, and the lawyers will say, "Tom, well, you can sue, but the question is whether you'll be successful." And the problem is, the perception is that if you're a conservative pursuing this type of claim against a Democrat administration, you would not get this reaction from the judiciary that is so helpful to the left. Now, in the end, Trump may win more than he loses, but the process is the punishment. And in my view, you have judges usurping the executive and legislative powers and pausing self-government for months based on a legal pretext to cover a political animus.
When should a federal judge be impeached and removed?
When? Well, the Constitutional envisions, obviously, impeachment for the traditional corruption, bribery, crimes. Either, ethics crimes, quite obvious ethics crimes, someone taking money for a judicial decision, or obstructing justice, the way some judges actually were accused of doing and impeached for, and removed. And the interesting thing about the impeachment power is that the founders were concerned, not the founders, but Americans were concerned about the Constitution and whether it gave the judiciary too much power. And in the Federalist Papers, they said, don't worry. If you have a judicial usurpation of the powers of the other departments or the other branches of government, the legislative or the executive, they said there are a few things. They said the judiciary is weak, really can't enforce its powers without the support of the other branches. And also you have this complete security of impeachment. So impeachment was put in there not just to check corrupt judges in the criminal sense of the word, but judges who act outside their power. And there's been really no impeachment of that nature. So there you have it. I wasn't going to let it go on so long, but it was an interesting comment. I agree with a lot of what I had to say, and I thought it was good for you to hear it. And it certainly was great and a good opportunity to educate Americans through C-SPAN about it. But so don't you believe it when they say, oh, you can't impeach judges. Of course you can. Now, politically, you may not want to, and there may be reasons of prudence for not doing so. But it's a check in place that the founders gave us. And our refusal to use it for 200 plus years, 250 years almost, really, practically speaking, really, I don't think has resulted in a better judiciary or more self-government or more constitutional government, but more challenges to our constitutional government from the unelected branch, the third branch. So we need the third branch to function properly under our constitutional system. And when the separation of powers gets broken or harmed, the separation of powers is to protect our liberties. So your liberties are put at risk when the separation of powers in the constitutional system fail. And I think it's failing today. Because we didn't vote for the judges and they're exercising powers that are not theirs under the Constitution. And judicial tyranny should be frowned upon and rejected and opposed. And the process for doing so is through the appellate process. Congress can provide checks through restrictions on certain judicial, they can eliminate certain judicial divisions, not too fine a point on it. And certainly you have the impeachment check as well. So Judicial Watch, of course, will continue to be participating in these debates, and I'm sure there'll be legal opportunities for us to participate in it's one thing to have the left engage in lawfare, as I mentioned, against President Trump. It's another thing to have the judicial branch engage in lawfare. And that's what my chief concern is, a judicial coup or judicial lawfare against President Trump and the voters and our Constitution. Our Constitution in the end. That's the big deal. So one of the more frustrating things we've been having in recent weeks is that we're having to go to court and sue to get documents about Biden scandals from the Trump administration because they don't want to give us the documents. I talked about how we sued USAID during the Biden administration because we wanted details of grants they were given to Gaza. We were suspicious, based on public reports, that the money was going to terrorists. And they don't want to tell us who they were giving the money to. At least Biden didn't want to. And then just a few weeks ago, we're in court, and there's a Justice Department attorney, an attorney for the USAID, so they're basically representing the State Department, and they don't want to give us the names either. So the cover-up continues. And now we have this new issue of State Department grants to support the leftist opposition to conservative Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Now, Prime Minister Orban is hated by the transnational left. The Obama-Biden gang hated his guts. The left-wing media hate his guts because he's a traditionalist conservative. He's kind of like Trump in many respects. And my colleagues have traveled to Hungary often because Hungary's been in the center of the opposition to the left-wing contempt for civil liberties, sovereignty, and other Western values. And Hungary's been kind of trying to stand strong in that regard. And Orban has been under sustained attack by the transnational left. And on his way out, Biden gave a bunch of money to Hungary's opposition against Orban. And we just had to sue to get information about how that happened. According to media reports, on the final day of the Biden administration, the U.S. Embassy in Budapest, Hungary, awarded grants worth millions of Hungarian forints to various Hungarian media outlets and educational organizations aligned with the opponents of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, an ally of incoming U.S. President Donald Trump. Furthermore, recipients of the grants included several well-known anti-government media outlets aligned with the Hungarian opposition but posing as independent press. Among the grantees, 444 received more than $20,000 U.S. dollars, and then there were grants of around $25,000, $18,000. So a lot of money was spread around. And a lot of these organizations, or at least one of them, was part of the Soros-funded network. So Soros has a big footprint in a lot of countries in Europe, and he doesn't need to spend a lot of money to have a big footprint. And it's just he supports these groups that supposedly are part of so-called civil society, but they just advance socialist and left-wing agendas to the detriment, I think, of U.S. foreign policy and Western values. The Biden State Department on Joe's last day in office apparently sent a cash infusion to Hungary's left-wing anti-Orban opposition organizations. Let's hope the new State Department stops the cover-up and produces records on this meddling. Now, we already sued, as I said, USAID for records on not only Gaza, but we just earlier this year sued for records on USAID funding material in Ukraine, because there have been complaints about some of the Ukraine money that had been spent by USAID in terms of waste, fraud, and abuse, and we can't get anything out of them, so we had to sue. And of course, previously we uncovered how top Soros operators and funded groups were getting money in places like Romania and Macedonia. So USAID not only funded Soros-aligned groups, but also worked with, we found in our investigations, Soros directly in terms of relying on Soros operators to help direct funding. So this is the type of work that's essential if we're going to uncover the extent and scope of the swamp. I mean, here we have the Biden administration trying to rig or meddle in the affairs of another country, not because it's in the U.S. interest, it's because they don't like the guy politically. I mean, the left doesn't like democracy. I know the United States is a constitutional republic, but you know what I mean. They don't like the ability of citizens to elect people or politicians they like under the rule of law. They oppose it. I mean, I'm convinced here in the United States, the left doesn't want to just steal elections, they want to end elections. Look at what just happened in France with Macron's opposition, Ms. Le Pen, who was just convicted by their, what I consider to be the French equivalent of the judicial deep state there. And she essentially was knocked off the ballot, following the lead of the Obama-Biden gang, which was really targeting Trump. Similarly, French leftists moved to jail the leading opponent to Emmanuel Macron and ban her from running against him in the next election. I mean, she was facing not only a ban from the campaign, but she was also facing 4 years in jail. Now, the last I saw, they were talking about the court had stayed the ruling. I think that's what happened. So maybe the outrage of the politicization of the judicial system in France, the international outrage of what they were doing, pushed them back. But there was an issue in Romania, again, where the leftists essentially scuttled an election. In Brazil, the former opponent of the leader, the communist, socialist, Marxist leader of Brazil, he's being prosecuted. It's not just Trump. The transnational left is trying to end their opposition all over the world. And it's through litigation like Judicial Watches that we're trying to get some insight into what's happening and how it went on. And the reason they are so successful at the transnational level is because they got your tax dollars to help them. And this is why we're suing, to find out what they're doing in Hungary. I mean, the same people who hate us here in the United States are operating in Hungary. And a lot of them are doing them in league with U.S. citizens or U.S. State Department, the embassy. It's really awful. So what else was I supposed to talk about? Oh, yeah. So the violent left continues. I don't know if, the terrorism against Tesla owners and Tesla continues, and Turning Point USA is a great group. So what they do lots of things, but one of the things they've been doing, and it's been online a lot recently, is Charlie Kirk and other representatives of Turning Point will go to college campuses and set up a space and communicate and debate with students. So the students will come up and they call them Ask Me Anything, and the students will say, what about X, or what about Y, or what about transgenderism, and argue about abortion, all sorts of other cutting edge or hot topics. And so both conservative liberals, hardcore commies, everyone can come up and speak. But of course they don't like that, because people like Kirk are effective, and these debates are effective in educating students who don't know what the arguments are on some of these issues on college campuses, which are generally uniformly left in terms of public policy discussions. So they had a plan in place to go to UC Davis, a public university, University of California, and Antifa showed up, and this is what happened.
Here we have the violent left, specifically Antifa, attack at Turning Point USA, table set up at UC Davis, which is a public university. So these young American patriots are not protected by the police in the face of the violent left. I'll say it once, I'll say it again. We're facing an insurrection by the left.
I mean, that's brown shirt, black shirt, whatever you want to call it. That's really dangerous activity. I mean, it's civil strife. It really is. And the left is engaging in it. They're targeting conservatives on campus. They're targeting Jewish students in various universities and have been for years, using the murder of Israelis on October 7th to justify more murder of Israelis. Very interesting position. And they, of course, are attacking and terrorizing Tesla owners in Tesla in order to impact the federal official, which is, in my view, insurrectionist as well. So the police were absent. They were there. That video didn't show it as directly as some other videos, but they were literally standing around watching this happen. So, as President Trump has highlighted and his Department of Education has highlighted, we can't allow this to happen. And if universities aren't protecting their students, then there ought to be hell to pay in terms of criminal and civil rights investigations and funding cuts. And we will continue to highlight and investigate this ourselves through your Judicial Watch. So, another great week at Judicial Watch. Millions of names removed. 1 million names, 1 million dirty voter names removed from the registration lists in New York City because of Judicial Watch. Isn't that great? 5 million nationally. So it's just great work. So this is why, again, you need to support your Judicial Watch. Go to our website, judicialwatch.org. Make a donation now. If you've already made a donation, you're already a supporter, I want to thank you. But ask you to renew your support or increase it because there's still a lot more work to be done. So with that, I wish you the best. Have a great week, and I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.